Hey, I'm Brad, and welcome back to Through the Decades, the podcast. This series, I'm in Gabriel Court in Saffron Walden, Essex, which is another McCarthy Stone retirement living development. Just like last time, throughout the series, I'll be interviewing some of the homeowners and getting an insight into their entire lives from their childhood through until now. And for the final time this series, I'm joined by Desmond, who is 87 years young. So, Desmond, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and a bit about your life?
Right, I was born just before the Second World War. I've survived the Second World War. I went to 10 schools because of it, and I didn't go to university, but I then joined my family firm of chartered accountants. We had an office in Jermyn Street near Piccadilly, and it was very much a family business, and I stayed there. We had all sorts of fascinating clients. I stayed there about 25 years, 30. When I then moved in, some of the clients wanted me to be a director of their firms, so I became that. And then I've been very careful with money, and I've been making quite a bit, and I was able to retire at 46.
Wow. Wow.
So I've been retired 40 years. And I think I had 3 days of boredom in those 40 years. Well, no, in the first 30 years. Otherwise, it was all quite fascinating. I helped a lot of people with things and so on. And here I am here. So I'm a chartered accountant, if I didn't say that.
What do you remember about the place you grew up? How was life growing up for you? Obviously, I presume that was kind of during the war.
Yes.
How was life growing up in that environment?
Well, one thing you have to remember about the war years, which really only struck me today, that one's parents had all been through the First World War. You hadn't, but they had. And they'd mostly lost family. So my mother had lost one brother, and another one had been gassed badly. My father had lost 2 brothers in the war. And so life for them was rather different for a child. So the main feeling of the war was excitement for a child. But at 4 years old, I was evacuated, and my parents stayed here. And the school had set up in a hotel, which obviously wasn't being used. And at 4 years old, I wandered off in a car with the headmaster, who'd told my parents that it really wasn't safe to keep me at home, which was very fortunate, as about 12 weeks later we had a direct hit on the house, and it's completely gone. I mean, it went straight through the middle, straight through the billiard table, which had my train set on it, and my parents, fortunately, because I wasn't at home, were out playing cards at a neighbour's. So everybody survived. So we stayed in. I have an elder brother who's 4 years older than I am, and we stayed up at Bettis at Coed in Wales, where we were evacuated, for about 8 months, I suppose. Actually, I went back there after 70 years. Wow. And stayed in the hotel where the school was evacuated to. The youngsters, I was the youngest person, were in tea rooms. At any rate, so my parents came to collect me, and my brother, and we came down to London again, and we eventually ended up, after 1 or 2 houses, back very near where the first house was bombed. And that all worked well, apart from the fact that the flying bombs started, and we were in a Morrison shelter. Do you know a Morrison shelter? All steel with open wires in the front. And I woke at the age of 7 probably to hear my mother saying, "It's us, it's us." And the V bombers were coming over, and one had stopped. You know, they were making an awful engine noise, and then when the petrol ran out, they stopped, and she said, "It's us, it's us." And it hit the house 5 doors away.
Wow.
And every ceiling came down, every window came in. Because my father was a fire watcher and was in the West End, he was putting out fires in the church and things when they dropped fire things. She'd put a kitchen wooden table up against the open side of the air raid shelter where we were sleeping, which was covered with shards of glass sticking in, which would have come straight through if we hadn't. But it didn't worry you as a child. And it was a great excitement. We went down to the house in the day, my brother and I, where they were digging to see if they could get people out, and we were sent away when they brought the bodies out. It was most annoying. So that was childhood. What was the question you asked me?
How was life growing up?
It was exciting. We had lovely shrapnel collections. When the shells went off in the things, shrapnel came down, bits of metal. It was even hot when you went out to get it. And you had a collection, and it was having the best collection was important. You cycled to school, and the instructions were if a flying bomb came over, you had to get off and lie in the gutter. That sort of thing. Life was different. And then after that, it all became normal very quickly.
So tell us a little bit about your school life. Obviously that must have been very different to many people.
It was.
Because of the war, which it's kind of been a bit of a theme, because obviously most people that I'm interviewing had to go through the war. So how was your school life during the war?
I was 4 when I went to Betws-y-Coed in Wales, and I then went to a little tutor for a period because my brother went, and I ended up back at the Dulwich Prep, where I spent 2 years, and then I got into Dulwich College. I was unfortunately rather precocious, and I was the youngest person at Dulwich for about 80 years when it had its new buildings, and I went in they just suddenly started a year of 9-year-olds, so you could go to Dulwich College at 9, whereas the start had been 11 or 13, and they moved me out of that year after half term, and I was then in a form which was 1 year different, and the next year they double jumped me, so I missed a year completely, and I was then in a form with people who were all 2 years older than me. Not to be recommended. It was all right for work, but it rather destroyed being able to do the things. I mean, they were all signing up to the 13-year-old rugger teams, and quite impossible for me. So that was all right. I took O-levels, you would say, at 13. I then moved to a boarding school in Hurstpierpoint, because I was given 6 months off because the eye specialist said I'd go blind if I didn't. And I was quite pleased at the time. And so we moved out of Dulwich and went to the country, and I went to the Hurstpierpoint College as a boarder for 2.5 years when I came out, and then I did articles in the family business. So that was the end of my education. But of course national service loomed. You may have heard a bit about that national service. Yes. So to give you an example, if I may, stop me if you don't want it, but I went into national service when I was 23, one of the last to do it. And they took me in, and the first training we got was on 25-pounder guns, Royal Artillery this was, and they're the ones you see in sort of saluting the Queen, that sort of size. That lasted for the first 3 or 4 months. I then went to an officer cadet school where they trained us on anti-aircraft guns, which were firing 200 rounds a minute. compare that with self-loading each round. And at the end of that, I was posted to the 1st Guided Weapon Regiment to shoot down aeroplanes from the ground. And that's all within 2 years.
Wow.
So it just shows you the speed with which change was going on.
How was that like?
Oh, it was great. I loved my national service. It was, it was a pity it stopped, because you made an awful lot of friends, and you met all sorts of people. And I ended up, in the end, as I was helping out, I was the assistant adjutant of this new thing, and they kept on having to go away, and I got left much more in charge than I would normally have been at that age. And it was all great fun, absolutely great fun.
What was your first job after you kind of finished school? What was your first job?
My first job was to become a chartered accountant as an articled clerk, we were called. You signed for 5 years, and at the end of the last year I was earning £3 a week, which at today's prices would be £4,000 a year.
Wow.
And it didn't pay for anything. But once you pass that stage, life got quite nice. So my first job was that, and then I ended up with possibly 100 clients. And they were all fascinating people. There were antique dealers. I don't know. And it was just fascinating. You know, if I was advising children what sort of job to go for, get one that meets people. And that's all life is about.
Tell us a little bit about your working life. Kind of how did that progress through the years?
Because of the work I did, and because it was a family firm, there was none of the sort of seniority. So I was at the same level at 23 as I was at 40, if you see what I mean, 35 or whatever.
Yeah.
And then when I became a director, so I went straight in on the board of directors to these companies, and one of them was the biggest firm of glass, not making glass, but using glass in Europe. And one of them, we started off with 3 factories making different sorts of furniture, and we ended up with 10. We weren't buying them because people, I think they're all probably where they build houses now.
What did your work consist of day to day?
Day to day, it was appointments with clients who were coming in with problems, or coming in with their tax information, or companies where they came in and said, we haven't got enough money, can we go and borrow some money from the bank? And we used to arrange that. We had good relations with the banks. We had good relations with building societies. Somebody wanted to buy a house, we could usually get them a mortgage. So it didn't really change in the sense of I'm a more important. I was important from day one, which is unusual.
Yeah. What would you say has been the biggest lesson that you've learned throughout your life?
That in business there's no such thing as gratitude. So there's gratitude, there's a sort of, yes, marvellous, you've done well, but all the people in business, in firms, just want it for themselves and for getting on. And that was a very big lesson to learn, because, you know, in a family business we helped each other. But that was one of them. And the other one is to do the things you want to do while you can, because it's very noticeable at my age that there are things I can't do which I'd still love to do.
Yeah.
But I can still walk 4 or 5 miles and so on.
If you had the chance to go back to any age or any year in your life, what would it be and why?
A difficult one. I think probably being in the chartered accountant business at the age of about 30. that was excitement, because everything that came at you was new. You were solving it and so on. As you get on, it's you've done it before.
Yeah.
You know.
It's like a new adventure.
Yeah.
This is a very big question. Some might argue the biggest question that I ask. But what was the best day of your life? There must be so many to choose from, but if you had to choose only one day of your life, what would you say was the best?
I think you'll find this very strange, but it would be the best day was when my parents came to collect me back from being evacuated, and they came up to Betsy Coyd. I wasn't allowed to know it was happening because the other children would have been upset, and they weren't allowed to come to the actual building to collect me. So my brother came to collect me, and we walked to this railway station where I found my parents, and we travelled back to London on a train with 4 seats, and they found a box of chocolates for me and my brother, which was very great rarity in the war. We had sweet rationing. And that was lovely, and it was all just lovely.
Yeah. What would you say you are most proud of? If you look back at something in your life and go, I'm really proud that I've done that, what would you say that would be?
Proud? I suppose being commissioned in the army, because I wasn't the sort of person I always thought that would. And because I was always with older people, I never had the benefit of big friendships. And it was when I got into the army that I suddenly realised, you know, I wrote to the army and got there, you can get your record. And it's every bit of paper that's passed about you in the 2 years you were in it. And I was apparently the most popular person in the intake, 30 people. I apparently had a marvellous sense of humour. I apparently got 4 A's out of 7, when my brother, who also went through this, said nobody got A's. And so, you know, I was proud, but it was merely that it was on a social scale rather than on a business scale. Business, I could quote you hundreds of things, but no one was more proud than the other.
When you were younger, what was your big dream? What was your big aspiration that you had for when you grew up?
Well, I decided I wanted to be a chartered accountant and join the family business when I was about 12. And that all happened. I suppose, because that cut out sort of thinking I want to be an aeroplane driver or, you know, things. I suppose the dream was that I would always have enough money to do the things I wanted to do.
Yeah. What were some of them things that you wanted to do outside of a career?
Travelling, and we managed to have a series of. I've got 2 children, and we managed to do an awful lot. I've stayed, not just for one night, in 50 Swiss hotels, wow. 50 different ones, and we used to drive, and in the course of that sort of holiday you made friends. So we've got friends in Germany, we've got friends in Italy, and it was finding new places, and this is what I'm missing now. The one thing that's really strange, as you get older, you obviously have more and more coincidences, because your life, you've got more occasions when you can have 2 occasions which meet. But I have really had some really peculiar ones. I moved here from the coast in Sussex, down by Chichester and those places, if you know it. I mean, it's 50 miles away. Came in here. The person you interviewed this morning, John, he went to school at the same time as me. I then went to church on the Sunday at the big church up the road to see what it was like, and reading the lesson, and they have a printed programme, was a boy that I'd had as a scout 50 years when I ran a scout troop at Dulwich College when I was 25. And I was able to follow him out of church, and I caught him up and I said, "Are you the Andrew that I used to know 60 years ago?" He went white. And he turned round, and so he was absolutely shattered. But delightfully shattered, shall I say. So that was one which is extraordinary. But the biggest one of all was going, after we'd moved to Sussex from Dulwich, I went to a party for the man opposite for their 60th wedding anniversary or something like that. And I was 65. Now, we had moved out of Dulwich to go to the coast when I was 15. Right, and we had a lovely party, and they got a garden with a swimming pool, and I was sitting in a swing hammock, and because everybody had gone, but there was one person still there, and he came and sat next to me, and he said, "Do you live near here?" I said, "Opposite." "Oh," he said. I said, "But I didn't always. I used to live in London." "Oh, so did I," he said. And I said, "Oh, did you?" He said, "Where?" I said, "Well, in south east or west," he said. "South east, north or west London." So I said, "Well, in West London, South London." And he then said, "Where?" So did I. "Whereabouts?" I said, "In Dulwich." He said, "North, south east or west Dulwich?" And I said, "West Dulwich." And he said, "Whereabouts?" And I said, "Well, just by Dulwich village." And he said, "So did I." He said, "What road?" And I said, "Burbage Road." And he said, "So did I." "What number?" And I said, 146. And he said, "So did I. We moved in when I was 5 years old." And he had moved into my bedroom when he was 5.
Wow.
That is some coincidence.
Wow.
I could do a lot more, but they're all silly little ones.
So let's move to the present day. You're living here in Gabriel Court. How long have you been living in this development?
4.5 years.
Wow. And what made you move to this development in particular? Because all my guests, they could have moved to any development, but why did you choose this development in particular?
McCarthy and Stone have lots of different places, and they're usually part care home, and they have carers around. The latest trend is to have restaurants and everything. This is an individual place where people have to be completely independent, capable of independent living. And so we have no permanent staff apart from Beverly, who you know, I believe, and the manageress. And that is why I came to here. I came to the area because my wife was in the home in towards Thaxted and on, and my daughter lives at Thaxted.
So, obviously, just to clear that up, there's independent living developments, which is what this is, which is where you live independently, which is perfect for you. And then for the people listening, assisted living developments could be classed as care home kind of sort of developments where the residents live with assistance. Yes. And they're two different types of development, both of which McCarthy Stone are lucky to have. How do you find this type of community living? Because obviously downstairs there's a very big social scene, which is optional, but that's also down there for you. How do you find this type of community living and independent living?
It's what I wanted. It works. A lot of the people here, as they get older, so a lot of the people have been here 10 years or more, they obviously aren't as independent as they were when they first came. And they quite like asking the manageress if they've got a problem, and she's marvellous, she really is. But I would certainly choose it again. It's not, I have no problems with it. And I am actually...
Would you recommend this type of community living? Would you recommend developments like this?
The independent ones?
Yes.
I would, to anybody who wants it. But and everybody who starts here knows about it and chooses it.
So we're going to end off this podcast episode, and I'll ask you, what one piece of advice would you give to the younger generations listening?
Do it while you can.
And there you have it, Bish Bash Bosh, another series done. Thank you, Desmond, for joining me today and sharing your incredible tales with us on the podcast. And I'll be back in another couple of weeks for my final series of Through the Decades with 6 more retired people geared up and ready to tell their story. Apart from that, thank you for joining me this series. And as always, don't forget to share the podcast on Spotify, Amazon Music or YouTube. And I will see you in a couple of weeks.